Once upon a time, there was a Chinese farmer who lost a horse, ran away. And all the neighbors came round that evening and said, "That's too bad." And he said, "Maybe." The next day, the horse came back and brought 7 wild horses with it. And all the neighbors came around and said, "Why, that's great, isn't it?" And he said, "Maybe." The next day, his son was attempting to tame one of these horses and was riding it and was thrown and broke his leg. And all the neighbors came round in the evening and said, "Well, that's too bad, isn't it?" And the farmer said, "Maybe." And the next day, the conscription officers came around looking for people for the army, and they rejected his son because he had a broken leg. And all the neighbors came round that evening and said, "Isn't that wonderful?" And he said, "Maybe." The whole process of nature is an integrated process of immense complexity, and it is really impossible to tell whether anything that happens in it is good or bad, because you never know what will be the consequences of a misfortune, or you never know what will be the consequences of good fortune.
Welcome everybody once again to the Sabotage podcast. Hello Craig, how you doing?
I'm alright.
So we just listened to an Alan Watts video there talking about the farmer and not knowing the good fortune of good fortune or the unluckiness of having unluckiness in a sense. And what's incredible is when you listen to that video, what it shows is this reality, this world that we live in, our minds project into wanting pleasurable experiences against uncomfortable experiences. And one of the fascinating things is we don't know if there's something pleasurable that's going to come from an unfortunate experience or something unfortunate coming from a pleasurable experience. And what you realise is that our mental capacity to try and find peace and non-suffering in any given situation, the very mechanism called your mind that's trying to find that place of salvation in pain, is the very thing that's actually causing you the pain. That in reality, everything is happening outside of your control, and that in any given moment your mind is pointing onto that situation, determining whether it's a bad thing or a good thing, and that very thing in and of itself is the problem. Does that make sense?
Yes, and what you do control is the reaction and the perspective of the events. So if we just look at that, because most people have a problem with anything that changes in their environment, and then you attach that brings emotional turmoil for you because of that change. And the thing that's really changed is your emotional attachment to the reaction of the changes rather than the change itself.
So the farmer, when we go back to the farmer whose horse left, and when we think back to thousands of years ago, a horse was an asset to a farmer, wasn't it? It was as important to you today as your car is getting you to work. And all of a sudden you get up one morning, your car's gone missing, it's been nicked or it's disappeared. Instantly you feel that you're at a loss, that something awful has happened, and it feels that way. And that's the same with your relationship. Your mother or your father have disowned you, and you feel that because it feels uncomfortable, you project onto it, your mind does that means that because it's uncomfortable, it means a bad thing has happened. But through the story, you realise that the farmer, with his wisdom, when all the town folk came together and said, "How unfortunate is it that you've lost your horse?" He said maybe, because he had a deeper wisdom that he can't ever really know whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. And it turned out that the horse returned with more horses. And then the town folk turned up and said, "What a great thing that is." And the farmer replied, "Maybe." So for instance, now you've lost your car and you've gone without the job. And on such an occasion, that day, the guy who had all the power in your job had to sack 6 people that turned up to work. And it just turned out the very first thing where you realise that it was a good thing in the end that your car wasn't there. So then now you project onto that situation that was a positive thing. And the idea behind this whole story is the idea that your mind can never understand, in the grand scheme of reality, what is good nor bad, and not to believe in your emotional impulse, whether something is bad or good, not to believe in that. And what it is this is what's difficult to really get your idea around, is that your ego, your mind, your body, your feelings are irrelevant in reality. You can never know what is good nor bad. Now, people will think, well, that's quite scary to think that. It's scary to think that I don't know what's good nor bad for me. Now, for me, it's a really good thing if you can get over that difficult first step, because it means you don't know fuck all about life. You don't know fuck all about circumstance or reality. You don't know what's good for you nor bad for you. You don't know whether something that's uncomfortable for you is actually going to be uncomfortable forever, or something that is fortunate for you is going to be fortunately good for you forever. And that's difficult, because it's like we want some sort of control over what's going on in life.
Well, look back in your life right now. Everybody can do this. Look back in their life and realise that you've already done this and seen this for yourself. It's just almost like you don't remember it. Yeah. Because at one point, you didn't get that perfect date that you wanted, you get rejected. And now you're happily married and you have children with somebody else, more dreamy than the girl that rejected you or the boy that rejected you. So you've realised that you've already hit this heartbreak, this pain, and something has come out of it more positive. And you could do that with the jobs that you've been in, with the friendships that you've had, through losing somebody. You've already experienced this, but again, your mind is only willing to attach to good happiness consistently, even though that your life's proved a lot of bad stuff happens as well.
And when we look at suffering, most people think because it feels uncomfortable to suffer, that suffering is a negative thing. Our minds project onto the feeling, because it feels bad, that it is bad. And actually, hopefully through the story, you can understand that mental mechanism that takes place because one feels bad, that it is actually bad, actually in reality is ridiculous, because you can never know if that thing, that breakdown of a relationship, that breakdown of an employment, that breakdown of you dependent upon a certain external situation to make you comfortable or happy, that breaking down and making you feel fucking awful and frightened out of your wits actually wasn't the best thing that could ever have happened to you.
And it's almost like it mirrors nature in what it does. The change in nature, the systems that take place, and then nature tries to improve on these old systems, and you as a mind and body goes through life and unfortunately have this unconscious reaction to avoid everything that makes you feel uncomfortable, when really the change which makes you uncomfortable leads to, if you really grasp the mind correctly, it will lead to a place where you suffer less with the dogma of reality, the stuff that you get attached to, like silly little things like material worth is one massive one that the human mind suffers with.
So I hear you saying there that being able to grasp that concept is the idea that you can suffer less. And what that does show me is that that's like the guy believing that because the 7 horses returned rather than the horse that he lost, that was going to be fortunate, which means he was going to suffer less. That depending unconsciously on the fortunate things happening to your life are just as dangerous as you believing in the uncomfortable things and the bad things that happen to you in your life. It's almost trying to get you to reset back to a place of here and now, which is outside of your mind. Your mind is a thinking machine. It dwells on the past. It projects it into the future. And that mechanism of dwelling on the past and projecting in the future makes you feel a certain way in the now. Now, if you can read the idea that this is uncomfortable, I don't want this to happen again, or this feels great, I want this to stay forever. If you can realise that those two polar opposites are just as painful in a sense, because nothing will last forever. You're always going to have everything that you've ever loved or become attached to is all going to fall to pieces around you eventually. It sounds very pessimistic, very nihilistic, but it is true that this life that we're in is impermanent. The only permanence about it is the fact that it's completely impermanent, that you can reset you back to, okay, what's going on now? How can I be in this present moment without having my mind, the mechanism of my mind, projecting good or bad on anything?
And I think the reason that the average mind out there does see it as nihilistic or pessimistic is because, again, you only have the emotional engagement with positivity. So you see the stuff that we're saying about completely shifting your perspective and not holding on to the positives. It's like, we're not telling you not to enjoy yourself with the positives, because it's great when it happens, but also be prepared to let that go eventually.
Let it go, yeah, 100%.
And that sounds negative to the average mind that doesn't understand something, because you're attached to all of this ideology that there's good and bad, there's good and evil, there's
right and wrong.
There's a great feeling that I have, and if anybody says a vocab that's just unheard of in my mind, I can't relate to that.
It's like, let's draw it back to something that we can resonate it to now, to do with mental health. Let's say there's a guy who's been addicted to alcohol, right? He's been through the most powerful discomfort the body can feel to overcome the alcoholism. And he's found a new addiction in talking about his story and trying to help others. But one thing's for certain is to fight to try and keep that same high that he got through the alcohol, through the affection and the appreciation from others, is just as toxic in a sense as his dependency on alcohol. I need you to give me a story that tells me that I am now different, that I am more of value, that I have more worth, and I am absolutely dependent upon you to give me that, in the same way that he was dependent upon the alcohol to give it to him. And when those people naturally can't give him that because they can't give it themselves, we're all looking for it in the same way, the negative feelings will make you want to go back to something that you could control. I can't control the people. It felt great at first when everyone said to me, well done, Bob, well done, John, you've overcome your alcoholism. But after a while, they get bored of the story and you get less recognition for what you've managed to do. And that feels painful. Now, what was the one place that you learned that you could get that feeling? It was the alcohol. It was to go back to the one thing that you could control, which was, if I get 3 bottles of beer down me now, I feel better than I did beforehand. And I can't get that now from the 11 likes that I used to get on Facebook. Because in my heyday, when I managed to overcome the alcohol, it was 30 likes. Now I am going back into my addiction, the hole that we're in. Now, the beautiful thing is, when we look at the Alan Watts story, it scares the life out of you because you realise you're going back to the very addiction that you tried to escape from. Even though the new addiction of the people liking you and giving you adoration for what you managed to achieve was great, it was impermanent. It didn't, and it could never have lasted forever. Now, when you go back to the addiction of the alcohol, like in the story, the farmer says, when the people of the town turn up, isn't it awful that John's gone back to being an alcoholic? Isn't that awful? And the farmer with his wisdom says, maybe. Because he never knows that that setback, that fall back into the addiction of the alcohol, was actually ever going to be a bad thing or a good thing. That actually it was all part of the process for you to find this thing inside of you that you needed, which wasn't the external alcohol to fulfill you. It wasn't even the people to give you the cheers and applause of, well done, you've done it. You're a template to us all to achieve what we need to do. You show us our own potential, how we can transcend our own suffering. that was just as toxic in a sense as the alcohol was. And that what they're forcing you to do is to look within and find this value and this worth deep inside who you are.
And to do it without a distraction, whether it's positive or negative, because a positive distraction means you do not actually cure the madness inside you that led you to the negative thing. You've just projected and propelled to the opposite side of it.
You make a great point. Cure. One of the worst things that therapeutic language is put on side of people, that means there's something wrong with you, so we have to cure it. It's the idea that there's nothing there to cure at all. That actually what's going on inside of you is the most natural process that takes place, just like a sun beaming its light onto a flower, and the flower is dependent upon the sunlight and the soil and the moisture to grow, that you're dependent upon the suffering and the pain to realise what it is that you really need to find, which isn't the validation from the alcohol or the external fan base of what you managed to achieve, but it's finding a place within you that is separate from all of those projections, where there is nothing but a state of pure being and wholeness and fulfillment. That I am glad I fell back into the alcohol, because what that has shown me is that I can't depend on you to give me that. And I'm glad that the alcohol pushed me towards you, because I've realised now that I couldn't depend on that. So what it's showing me is that everything that I'm looking for outside of me is a distraction and an illusion, and it's a teacher. It's teaching me to look deep in. It's teaching me to die in my own pain to find something that can transcend me. And believe it or not, it was there all along inside of you. It's just that you absolutely never had the education doing it. You've been born into a body always dependent on somebody else for your survival. That this is a normal growing mechanism that reaches the point in time where you realise that you can't depend upon anybody to be your salvation. That the salvation that you've been looking for outside of you was always there within, but you've had to die to get there. Now people go, it's too hard, it's too difficult, it's too uncomfortable. Absolutely it is. But that's why it's there. Yeah, and it's a pointer.
And you're looking at it as if it's uncomfortable. Now, let's take the story again, the power of perspective. What we're trying to say is the people that came round and said this is good, this is awful, will suffer less than the man who's saying maybe. Now, why is that? Because this man isn't expecting massive highs or gains, and he isn't expecting losses and defeats. He knows that he doesn't know what he expects. He doesn't know what nature will bring him in the future. He is purely present with maybe. Now, take that into your own life. If you could translate that into your own life, what that will do is when you hit the shit, you will say, I hit the shit for a reason. Nature is taking its course. I'm in psychosis, but it's not scary. It's not bad. It's not going to have to mean that I'm in crisis.
And it feels scary, but I don't have to believe that because it feels scary, it is bad. I can actually know that it feels scary and know that it's actually a good thing. Changing that whole perception around feeling afraid.
Yes.
That feeling afraid doesn't mean that it's bad. It actually means quite the opposite. It means that it's like, think about it like this. Everybody's been through shit in their life. Everybody's been through shit. It's everybody, whether you're rich or poor, everybody's going through their own inner demons. Absolutely. And there's only two ways you can work through that, is to realise that the shit that you've got can project out, and you can be throwing up the shit that you've got in your body, whether it's pessimistic and angry and projecting hate and pain on others, or you can realise that this shit that you've got inside of you, you can turn into like a manure. You can turn it into something that can absolutely grow you and move you beyond the pain. So you can turn the most diabolical pain, the most diabolical fear, the most diabolical suffering, as uncomfortable it is when you're feeling it, you can realise with this perspective that you can turn anything that is painful into gold. Now, the beautiful thing is, through that story, as you rightly say, Craig, is that when you project that you can turn it into gold, it puts an expectation on the pain, And then if that pain doesn't get met with the outcome that you've unconsciously desired, you're going to suffer even more than you was originally in the pain. Now, this is the beautiful thing about it. It's because it's like, let's say that happens, that you project in this pain and suffering. Craig and Andrew have talked about the fact that something beautiful can grow from this manure. And I'm feeling better in this pain. I'm feeling more empowered. And I'm feeling that the outcome of feeling this can be even better. And then it happens. And then you get more rejection on top of it. And then you suffer even more. The farmer says maybe. Which means that just because it feels bad once again, doesn't mean that you can say that it's bad that you've slipped back into the old addictive personality, the old depression, the old anxiety, the old OCD. Don't ever let your mind project onto your current experience the value of it.
And there's a way that you can do this. I know from my personal experience, and I'm sure other people have had this in the past as well. When you come across an uncomfortable moment in your life, which is guaranteed to happen, you'll feel the feeling, and it's horrible, and it's like, starts off at little butterflies, and it starts like nervousness, and then it grows and grows, and then it sort of spreads to your head like a fog, and it starts to paralyse you, and then you can spew out the toxic behaviour, and it becomes horrible for everybody else, and then it can get to a point where every thought is just alien. Now, there's a place where you can enjoy that because the light's been shone on a place where you need to understand and learn why this trigger has gone from this to this to this to this. And if you can start to view that as, do you know what, every time I feel uncomfortable, it's not showing how weak I am and how bad I am and how many fears I've got. It's highlighting where I need to learn about my past environment and the beliefs that I have picked up, and how I can relearn that and say, why do I have this? And you can start to study yourself, like a sort of educate yourself on yourself with all the things that you've got. So the actual feeling, which normally makes you paralysed and bad, no longer grows to that level now, because you're just like, oh, it's great, I've just got nervous with the manager. What was that all about? And you can do some inner work and realise that you actually don't think that you're good enough to speak to the manager. You've put him on a pedestal. There could be hundreds of scenarios just based on your environment, the way you was brought up. And then you just learn and learn. And the more that you learn about that, the pain never gets to the stage it has to get to most of the time, where it is that toxic nonsense in a way.
Toxic nonsense in a way.
Because if you think about it, right, when you've split up in a relationship, the first thing you'll say is you'll either get angry, project anger, or you'll feel worthless, and you'll basically go towards something that's just a perspective that is only going to harm you in the long run, harm the people around you in the long run.
You tell yourself a story, don't you?
That's it. And then there's levels of that. You can be the empath and the victim. You can be the horrible, angry person. You can go through stages of this week by week, day by day, minute by minute.
Now, the beautiful thing through this story, once again, is if you go back to being the empath and you're struggling from the breakup, who knows whether that was a good thing or a bad thing?
That's it.
You can enjoy being the empath. If you go back to being the narcissist that says, I'm better than them, who knows whether that was a good thing or a bad thing to say that? The beautiful thing is you can get out your own mental capacity to try and find fulfillment or acknowledgement or worth in any way, and just go, there's something happening that's outside of my control. There's something flowing that's outside of me that I can just surrender to. And I don't know whether that surrender is going to bring me a good thing or a bad thing. All I know is it doesn't really matter whether I know it's going to bring me a good thing or a bad thing anyway, because it's just going to happen. Reality is good things and bad things are going to happen to good people and bad people. 100%. But if we're looking to try and alleviate as much suffering as possible in this mental health podcast, it's about trying to get people to become conscious of how reality works as close as we can get to it. And reality works like this. You have your own needs, wants and desires to try and make you feel fulfilled in life. And those needs and wants and desires are the very thing that's always going to sabotage your happiness. So you need to let them go. You need to give them up.
And that, I suppose, the ideology or the idea or the narrative that you need to start thinking of more is that when the shit hits the fan, which it will, you no longer attach all of those normal levels of anxiety, depression, sadness, happiness with the same sort of power and energy. You let it fizzle out into an understanding that, well, that was bound to happen. If this reality is so basically unconscious and happening and reactive, all this was some sort of part of a process, a journey.
It was like in the wildlife documentaries where you say someone on a boat in Antarctica and you just see that cliff face fall into the ocean. It was always going to happen, whether you liked it or not.
But at the moment, people are reacting like, I didn't see that coming, right?
Well, guess what? None of us see anything coming, Craig.
No.
We don't. None of us do. We can try and, to avoid pain and suffering, analyse what could become of us, what could become of a relationship, what could become of our children, what could become of our employment. But nobody fucking knows. Nobody knows. And it's difficult, but all you can ever do is say at the end of it, when you've gone through the loss of losing your children or losing your relationship or you losing your employment, was it a bad thing that happened to you? Maybe. I don't know yet. I have no idea what it's to become. I have no idea whether the children that I've lost is going to make me become a better father than I ever wished I could have been. I have no idea whether losing the relationship can make me a better lover than I could ever have been. I don't know whether losing my employment could have made me a harder worker than I ever could have been. Nobody knows anything other than maybe.
That's it. And a lot of people also do this, and I think this is another thing that's just bad for your psyche to grasp this. You'll look at somebody else and you'll think that that person has got their shit together. They're always positive, they're always happy, they've got these good habits in place. And it's like, don't look at somebody else as if they're doing things that you can't do. It's like they are doing what they need to do to survive. Just like you need a drink to survive, just like that you need to have a break and escape the world. They're doing that in a different way to you.
And it don't matter, does it? Because if that guy that you look at who's got the great car and the great house and is successful, it's great, it looks beautiful, doesn't it? But guess what? He's going to die and he's going to lose everybody in his life and every need, desire and attachment that he's ever wanted. He's going to die in front of him. And it sounds awful to say. It sounds so like I'm pissing on that parade. But it's just so true. Do you realise the dream that you're in? Everybody that you have ever loved is going to die. You are going to die. Let him go on his unconscious pursuit for perfection. And let him reap the rewards of it. Let him but he will always be lost in trying to sustain that or build upon it. He's always going to be suffering. Let him do it.
So where does this true happiness lies then? With this power of perspective, where can somebody have this lack of suffering with the mental ideology that we currently have, and it's getting worse and worse throughout the world?
Well, look, you look at the guy that's successful. They can never make enough money. They're always in that state of fight or flight. They're always trying to prove to the world that they are enough. In the same way that the drug dealer or the drug addict that's trying to find enough money is trying to find a roof over there to feel that they're okay and safe. Just like the successful person. The successful person is better at doing it, but they're still in the same game you are. And the game is flawed. you're all going to fucking die. And what's scarier than that is not only are you going to die, which is frightening, but everybody that you've ever loved and tried to do it for, if we go right back to the beginning of the podcast, which is everything we're doing is through how we are perceived by others. That we're always looking for an external validation to find the validation within. That they are looking for the validation the rich person is as much as the poor person. They are never going to find it. They're going to be released like dopamine in the brain, little moments of validation, but it's non-permanent. They're going to lose everything. They are going to lose all of their needs, their wants and desires. They're going to lose the people that they've loved and the people that they don't love. Everything is going. Everything is impermanent. And so are you, the people that aren't rich. The only happiness to find in all of that is to realise that that's the game that's going on in town, mate.
I was going to say, just to turn it on a higher note that you're just not going to die. Maybe death isn't the way that we imagine, guys. Maybe the death is a newborn birth to a new reality that's 100,000 times better than this one. And what would be 100,000 times better than this current reality? It would surely be to let go of all the egotistical shit that happens in the world and just be like that wisdom, the man of wisdom, and say, maybe it's good, maybe it's wrong. And if you can do that in this life and get heaven now and feel eternal forever, you live in peace for the rest of your life with whatever happens. And then, do you know what? Surely you can get to that point where death is creeping up closer and closer, and you can just think, now guess what? I lived 10 years, 5 years, 2 years without any suffering mentally. It was fucking worth it.
Maybe. And that brings us to the end of the podcast. Thank you everybody for tuning in.